In today's podcast, you'll learn some useful language to talk about the world of the Broligarchs, those tech-savvy men who partly control the world. Like it or not, this very small and extremely powerful group affects your daily life. So let's find out more about them and the typical expressions associated with them on this week's episode of
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener to the podcast. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 60 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, Reza?
I'm doing even better than an hour ago because I just had a very, very nice coffee and one of Craig and his wife's famous pastries. So I'm doing very, very well. Thank you.
Yep, we're full of energy and ready to talk to you about the topic of Broligarchy, which, to be honest, I hadn't heard of. So maybe we better explain exactly what it means. What's Broligarchy, Reza?
Well, I only heard the word itself a couple of months ago, but it's one of those things that, certainly if you're a native speaker, but even if you're not, you immediately guess what it means. So you guessed, right? As soon as you heard it, you knew what it meant, even though you'd never heard it before.
I had to think about it for a while, but yeah, then I kind of realized it's a portmanteau word. What's that?
We actually spoke about portmanteau words before, quite a while ago in episode 333. So there's a link in the show notes if you want to type in inglespodcast.com/333, you'll go to the episode where we spoke about portmanteau words. A portmanteau means when you take two words and kind of crunch them, mix them together. So for example, the word breakfast and the word lunch are two independent words, but mix them together and you get brunch, which, as everybody knows, is something which is kind of a mixture between breakfast and lunch. Someone who likes to shop a lot, an alcoholic, mix those two words and you get shopaholic, someone who likes to shop a lot.
Or alcoholic.
Alcoholic, or dare we say, Craig, chocoholic?
You can say chocoholic, chocolate and a holic. And also alcoholic would be AIRC. Fans of this podcast, we lovingly call them alcoholics because AIRC is Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
They're our favorite addicts.
Yeah.
And we will do nothing to help you with your addiction. In fact, we wish to fuel your addiction.
By creating new podcasts every week. And podcast is also a portmanteau word because pod originally came from the iPod, from the Apple iPod, and cast you might recognize from broadcast. Push those two words together and you get podcast. And then we've got, with liarchy, we've got the prefix bro at the beginning, B-R-O, bro, which is a casual term for a male friend. And I think it comes from brother. So, hey, bro is like saying, hey, brother. And it's a sign of affection, usually from one man to another man. What about oligarchy?
That's a word I'm sure most of our listeners would guess or know because it's so similar in Spanish, isn't it? And most languages. An oligarchy is a system of power held by a small and privileged group. In this day and age, I guess people think above all of the Russian oligarchy because it's not exactly a well-kept secret that a very small group of powerful people seem to pull most of the strings in modern-day Russia.
What does pull the strings mean?
To pull the strings is like what a puppet master does. You know, a puppet, a little doll which has strings, tiny little ropes. And if you move that, the doll appears to move. So if someone metaphorically is pulling the strings, they may not be what you're looking at. You're looking at the doll which is moving, but they're making the doll move. They're the ones behind the scenes who have the real power. So the Russian oligarchy is pretty well known by most people as the people who run Russia, although in theory it's the government, but in actual fact it's a small group of privileged millionaires or billionaires.
And a broligarchy refers to a male-dominated social or professional group, typically people in positions of influence. And decisions are made in this group of bros to benefit the group, to benefit the in-group. And this is often at the expense of diversity and meritocracy or fairness. Reza, have you got a definition for meritocracy in case people don't know what it means?
Yeah, so let's break it down into the word merit and then add ocracy at the end, a bit like anything else which ends in cracy, like bureaucracy. So a meritocracy is when the best person, therefore they have merit, right? They have merit when the best person gets the job because they worked hard or have strong skills. Not because they know someone or they're important from a rich family, but because they have merit. So that system, which is an ideal system, most people would say, is a meritocracy.
Really, a broligarchy is a 21st century form of plutocracy. And plutocracy is when only the wealthy elite hold the power. So the people at the top, the wealthy people, people with money in higher society, hold the power. That's a plutocracy. But haven't the wealthy elite always held power? Apart from maybe when there's been a communist revolution, generally speaking, especially in democracies, it's usually the wealthy elite who are in power, isn't it?
Exactly. So really, a broligarchy is just a 21st century form of a plutocracy where the wealthy elite hold power. But by using the term broligarchy, it has come to imply the brothers, the male friends, who dominate the world through their closed networks, such as business and politics, but above all, I stress, the tech industry. So the word broligarchy is very closely associated with the tech bros. Because let's be honest, virtually all of them are men, and they're often from a similar background, and they maintain control through informal connections, also formal connections, but above all, informal connections, shared values, and an exclusion of outsiders. I mean, we don't like to get into specific politics too often on this show, but I'm sure a lot of you saw on TV the inauguration of the current American president, and it was quite striking that on the front row of the VIPs, the invited guests, all the broligarchs, 6 of them or so, were sitting together. So you didn't have to look too hard to spot what was going on. Sitting together as special invited guests to Donald Trump's inauguration. There they were, sat together. And you don't get invited to the President of the United States inauguration if you're not a very important person. So just have a look at the YouTube clips and you'll see what I mean.
And we should mention that we're recording this podcast in the summer, July and August of 2025. And that's why we'll mention a few of the broligarchs that are currently in the picture at this time in history.
So who are they then? Who are these guys at the top? Who are the current broligarchs?
Well, let's talk about the companies first before we mention the names. So some powerful technology companies, and I'm sure you've heard of these. There's Google, there's Apple, there's Facebook, or the umbrella company Meta, who own Facebook, and Samsung, mobile phone company and technology company, Amazon, of course, and Tesla, and Nvidia, who make the processing chips. Then there's Microsoft, and there's one I hadn't heard of, so I did check it, TSMC, and that stands for the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Those are the main companies that are controlling things at the moment and dominating investment in technology.
Yeah, not only technology, but also global markets and information systems in generally, all sorts of systems, including defense, health, education, etc. You may not have heard of TSMC, but being the biggest manufacturers of microchips in the world, believe me, they're important.
And these companies, they control major platforms that we use on a daily basis for communicating, for shopping, for getting our news about current affairs, and also for entertainment, among other areas. And the leaders of these companies have become some of the most powerful people in the world, with very strong influence over public opinion, over government policy, and maybe even democratic elections.
So we've mentioned the companies, most of whom you've heard of, but not all. But what about the actual people, the bros? Well, some of the CEOs, the chief executive officers, or top players in general, if they're not CEOs, they're presidents or something like that, in these companies are global household names, such as Elon Musk. I'm sure most listeners have heard of him, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos. I would be extremely surprised if you hadn't heard of those guys. But others are perhaps less well known, depending on which circles you hang out in, but they're still extremely influential. I'm talking about people like Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, very important tech company. Some of you might have heard of Tim Cook, the current CEO of Apple. Some of you might have heard of Sundar Pichai. Had you heard of him before, Craig?
Yeah, I've seen a few interviews with him, and he comes across as a very nice guy, actually, during interviews. To come across means the impression I get of him, from what I'm seeing as he's speaking, seems to be quite positive. But of course, you can't not include him as the CEO of Google, Alphabet. You can't not include him as one of the tech pros.
And the last one is that company that I mentioned earlier, TSMC. The CEO of that company is a guy called C.C. Wei, which I admit I hadn't heard of till I did my research, but I had heard of his company, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. And last but not least, an often invisible character in the shadows. In fact, some people would call him a shadowy character, none other than Peter Thiel, Thiel, who's the co-founder and a big investor in several companies, above all big tech companies, but others, such as Palantir. Heard of them, Craig?
Yeah.
And I'd be surprised if somebody listening hadn't heard of PayPal. So Peter Thiel, who's got his finger in a lot of pies. That means he's involved in a lot of activities, although he's not that public, except in the world of tech geeks, so to speak.
And the people that Rez has just mentioned, the individual power of these tech bros is immense. It's incredible. It's very, very large. Never mind their combined oligarchic power. When I say never mind, I mean without considering or without even factoring in, when you put them all together, how powerful that group of people could potentially be. And some critics argue that this concentration of so much power and money in a small group of men reduces competition, threatens democracy, and increases inequality. On the other hand, though, the supporters of these people say that these companies bring innovation to the tech world and they create jobs and they help with global connectivity. They help people to connect around the world.
So to talk about the world of the Broligarcks, let's consider some useful vocabulary. So some of this vocabulary is very specific to Broligarcks. Other expressions could be used in other areas. For example, the word nepotism, that's not a new word. It means favoritism shown to relatives or friends in professional settings. Clearly, that's not a new thing. That's been around probably since humankind itself has existed. However, it is particularly popular amongst the bros of the tech world.
It's quite popular in Spain as well. People passing on jobs to their cousin or someone in their family or their in-laws, perhaps. I've seen that here many times. Yeah. The next word we've got for you that's useful, I think, in this discussion is privilege. Privilege. So that's when you have some unearned social or professional advantage or advantages based on characteristics like gender, race, or background. And privilege often collocates with white privilege, because maybe you were born white and in the West, which immediately gives you so many advantages over people born in another ethnicity or in another country where there aren't so many opportunities.
And I would repeat that privilege is not a new thing. It's the same as nepotism. It's always existed, of course. But I say again, who was sitting on the front row of the inauguration of the current American president's list of VIPs? Who? The bros. They were the guys sitting there. Not anybody gets a seat there, but they have the privilege of being asked to go there.
But are you suggesting that they got there because of nepotism or privilege?
Not nepotism, privilege. Because I don't see why they should be there when there are other really, really important business people who weren't invited. The guys in the world of high tech were, but there are other really important business people who weren't invited because they're not nearly as influential as the bros.
Another useful word is bromance. You might notice there a connection with romance. And if it's a romance between brothers, in this case, you could call it a bromance when a group of men or maybe two men have a very strong relationship and a close connection. Non-sexual, there's not sex involved there usually, but there's a very strong connection and affiliation between men. And a bromance is often used in a funny kind of mocking way where you're talking about people and maybe joking with them or suggesting that there's a close relationship. You could call it a bromance. So a strong connection between men. Let's take a quick break here because I know you listen to this podcast to take your English to the next level. But what about your speaking? Is your fluency improving? Are you happy with your speaking skills? My conversation course focuses on making you a more confident and more fluent English speaker. You'll join me and a small group of motivated students, and we'll meet on Zoom and have topical discussions, role plays, debates, and presentations that will expand your vocabulary and help you express yourself effectively in English. So be proactive and take the first step towards becoming a confident and fluent English speaker. Send me an email today to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you details of the next online conversation course. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Lobbying is not a new term, and it's useful to talk about politics in general. So it's using organized, well-funded groups called lobbies. That's the name of the group. And the people involved in it are called lobbyists. So these lobbies try to influence government policy. They're not new. They've existed since politics itself has existed. But my point is the lobbying of the Broligarchy is extremely active. And I really don't need to labor the point too much. I'll just say Elon Musk. He didn't even hide the amount of money that he gave to the Republican Party. It's no secret or conspiracy. It's there on public record.
And don't confuse Reza's definition of lobbying in this case to a lobby in a hotel, for example. It's not the same meaning. If you go into an office building at the ground floor, as soon as you go in the entrance, or a theatre perhaps, then you walk into the lobby. This use of lobbying is different. Then we've got glass ceiling, which is an invisible barrier. The ceiling is at the top of the room that you're in. But if there's a glass ceiling, that means it's something preventing or stopping women or maybe some minority group of people who don't usually have the privilege, and it stops them from reaching top positions. So glass ceiling is a way of stopping some people, especially women, from being promoted and getting to a higher place in a company, for example.
Now, our next word, believe it or not, is not a particularly new word, and that is networking. building professional or social connections to gain opportunities. In other words, building networks. So yeah, a network is a word closely connected to internet, but it existed a long time before that. And there have been networks long before computers were even invented. But of course, the world of tech makes networking easier and more important than ever.
Then we've got the word gatekeeping. You can see there the word, or you can hear the word gate, G-A-T-E, and then to keep. So what's gatekeeping? Well, gatekeeping is controlling access to power or to resources, often to exclude outsiders. You can't join the group unless you meet our standards, for example. And you can also compare this to a walled garden. If you have a company that offers services like Apple, for example, once you're inside Apple's ecosystem, then you're in a walled garden and there are gatekeepers there that kind of prevent you using other technology or other services because you're inside their ecosystem. And when you talk about elite society and special groups of people holding power, you can use the expression old boys club or maybe old boys network. So it's a group of men, usually men, a network of men who support each other in professional or social contexts. And they often exclude other people from coming in their closed circle unless they are similar, unless they've got a lot of money or a lot of power. So that's an old boys club or an old boys network.
Now, some people, when talking about the modern broligarchs, refer to a two-tier democracy. Two-tier is spelled T-W-O, then a little hyphen, little line in the middle, T-I-E-R. So it's nothing to do with crying. It's to do with two levels. A tier is a level. So a two-level, a two-tier democracy. And what they are talking about is a system whereby, in parallel to traditional democracy shaped through elections, also there's the wealthy elite who shape governments purely because of wealth. So that's why they refer to a two-tier democracy. Yes, we still have votes, we still have elections, but the other tier, the other level is, well, what the bros and their friends say.
The next collocation is corporate capture, to capture something. This means, actually it's stronger in the US than it is in Europe, but this is where there's a lot of influence by large corporations over governments. So sometimes even dictating or ordering government policy. And when in reality, the reverse should be true. It should be the governments that are controlling what the companies can and can't do. Whereas when groups of companies or maybe even one individual company gets so powerful, it's actually lobbying, there's that word, lobbying the government to create laws in their favor. So it's obviously not a healthy thing to happen when the companies are controlling things instead of the government.
Data tracking means systematically collecting, sorting, that means classifying, analyzing and interpreting data to gain insights into consumer behavior. And it's a very, very useful thing. It's also a very intrusive thing.
Useful for who? Oh,
exactly.
For the public.
It is a useful thing, but who's it useful for? Well, it depends what they use that data for. If they use that data to try and influence your political thinking, yeah, maybe it's not so useful for you. Maybe it's more useful for political parties, for example. Or if they try and persuade you to look at certain news sources because of a few things you've clicked on and they push you in a certain direction, maybe that's not ideal for you. So there's a lot of debate around data tracking.
Yeah, although there is an argument on the other side. Some people might say that, yes, they are using your data to sell you stuff. But on the other hand, you are getting Google, not only email, all of Google's services for free. Also, social platforms like Facebook, yes, they collect your data, but you do get the free Facebook service. And if you want these kind of services, including email and everything for free, then you're paying for it with your data. It's good to be aware of it, but it's not only a one-sided thing.
Totally true. Now, the the last 7 or 8 terms that we've been speaking about have focused on the corporate and the high-tech side of what we refer to as broligarchy. But there's the other aspect, the fact that they're bros. Let's steer it back in that direction, because they definitely are bros. You won't find many, if any, women in the club. So we need to know terms like alpha male. Most of the bros are pretty archetypal alpha males. They may not look strong. You don't have to be physically strong to be an alpha male. It can be in other ways. An alpha male, as I'm sure most of you probably already know, but let's make it clear, is a dominant male who asserts power in group settings. So it could be physically, or it could be mentally or psychologically, or a combination of all three. So these days, there's a lot of talk of alpha male, and it seems to be the ideal profile for the tech bros.
Yeah, a bit like Reza, really, when we go out together, all the guys together. Reza always takes control of the group and dominates in a social setting. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm just joking there. Patriarchy. Patriarchy is a social system where men hold primary power. And if it's the woman who holds the power, it's a matriarchy.
So, of course, if there is a patriarchy, then there's gender disparity. That's our last useful term. Gender, male, female. Yeah. Disparity, if there's a disparity, it's not equal. So it means the unequal treatment or unequal outcomes, results between genders. Obviously, everybody, I think, would agree that still there are areas of life where men seem to have more opportunities than women.
So, Reza, if we agree, and I think most people would agree with this, that information is power, more so, I think, these days in the internet and technology age, and if we also say that power translates into money, is it wise? Is it clever to keep on freely giving our personal information to these tech giants, usually for free? What do you think? What do we get in return from them?
Well, I leave it up to each individual to decide. Personally, I don't like the idea. I've always been quite a private person, which might surprise the several thousand listeners of this podcast out there. But that's different. I'm controlling, in a way, the information you're getting right now in this podcast.
I told you he was an alpha male.
Well, you could be controlling, but not necessarily an alpha male, yeah? But I admit I am controlling information because I'm fairly private. So every single time that I can reject cookies, I reject them. I'm that
I never reject cookies, especially if they're chocolate.
Right. You got the one very important exception. Yeah. Because I don't think we get much in return. I mean, I've noticed that by rejecting cookies, they say, please no, blah, 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 small print, blah, 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 tiny letters, blah, blah, blah. The system may not work the same. It always works the same. It doesn't make a difference if you accept the cookies or not.
Well, I don't think I'm 100% in agreement with you. I do think we get a lot in return. And I noticed that you use a lot of free online services. So surely there must be some give and take. I mean, you can opt out of these things. To opt out means to decide not to participate. You can not have an email account. You cannot use Google. You cannot browse the web. You cannot even have a mobile phone if you don't want to. So all of these services are voluntary. And I do think I get a lot in return for sharing my information. And the worst thing that's happened to me over the years I've been sharing my information is that I get targeted ads, which is what cookies partly help to do. So they give information and they know that I'm interested in cars, for example. So I will see a car advertisement. I won't see an advertisement for something I'm not interested in.
Craig, some individual tech bros or companies, but even one person, an individual, they can have considerably more wealth, more money than entire countries. Is there any problem with that?
Well, is there any problem with that? You mean, is there any problem with
interpret the question as you like.
With countries?
It's up to you to interpret it.
Well, I think you're comparing with that question.
I'm not comparing anything. I'm asking, is there any problem with that? Don't put words in my mouth and I won't do it to you. Is there any problem with that?
I think that question is comparing apples with oranges, which means it's not looking subjectively at the situation in the world. Unfortunately, at the moment, you have California, which is an incredibly rich state in the US, and then you have South Sudan, who's very, very poor and is at the moment embroiled in war. Embroiled means there's war going on and happening there. So you can't really compare what's happening in prosperous countries with underdeveloped countries or developing countries. It's just the way of the world. And you can say it will be fantastic to live in a completely equal world where everybody is happy and has enough to eat and people aren't fighting each other. But unfortunately, that's not reality.
And it never was.
No.
It's never been the case.
Never been the case.
The only thing is it's far, far, far more exaggerated than it's ever been. So it was like that 100 years ago, very much so. Then there was less disparity for quite a while, but it's increasing again. Yeah. What I'm saying is the disparity between the tiny group of elite who control a lot of the world and the vast majority of the rest of the people, the difference wasn't so big in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It's got bigger. However, it was very big at the turn of the 20th century. Around 1900, it was very big. So we're kind of in a situation similar to about 120 years ago, which then changed, but we're going back to that. In fact, there's a term that perhaps we should have put in the notes. Quite often now you'll get people when they're talking about this sort of thing, talking about the Gilded Age. I don't know if you've heard of that we're in a way going back to the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age was just before the outbreak of the First World War, and there were business people who had incredibly immense power. And then the First World War, strangely enough, put an end to that, or lessened it. And the Second World War again. But we're kind of going back to that. Maybe it's wars, bizarrely, that have the effect of reducing disparities of wealth. I'm not promoting wars, don't get me wrong, but it seems to be a secondary effect of war.
There is an eroding of the middle class. If something erodes, it disappears slowly, it wears away. So I agree with you that there are more extremes of wealth in the West. And I don't know if that's going to continue.
And in the East, we've spoken about TSMC in Taiwan. It's not just the West, it's in the East as well.
Yeah, good point.
Some critics claim that widespread corporate capture that we mentioned earlier by tech giants, it's effectively the beginnings of a coup. Are they exaggerating or might they be right?
Well, we've mentioned this, especially at the beginning. I think it's part of the government system that we're living in. We're living in democracy, which promotes capitalism and the free market. And I think it's a result of that. People climbing to the top and making as much money as they can, which is basically what businesses are supposed to do. And as long as we're living in this kind of political environment, I don't think we should be surprised at the way it's going. It kind of like it's agreeing with its definition. We're in a free market and people are making money. And unfortunately, the people who suffer are the people at the bottom of the ladder, at the lower levels of society.
But you don't see it as the beginnings of a coup?
No, I don't. I don't see it. Do you?
No.
Well, we
you
agree.
were expecting me to say yes.
Well, no.
I said some people say that, but I think they're exaggerating.
I think they are,
But
yeah.
some people say it. However, I still say we have to be careful. I don't think it's quite got that far yet, but I think we do have to be careful about corporate capture. Although it's not a new thing, but it's now because of the access to tech that business people with a lot of power can convert it very easily into political power. In the past, it wasn't so easy. Now it's really easy, I think.
But what do you think, listening to this? What's your opinion? It's your turn to practice your English. Do you think that these broligarchy societies exist in your country? If you do, in what industries, what areas? Let us know what you think. Please send us a voice message. You can reach us on SpeakPipe and practice your English. Go to speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. Or by email, you can send us an email with your comment or question. write to me, Craig, CRAIG, at inglespodcast.com, or you can reach Reza at belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English with free or paid resources, why not visit the Mansión Inglés website? It's at mansioningles.com. And specifically for paid products, you can also browse the online store at store.mansioningles.net.
And before we say goodbye, we'd like to thank our Patreon supporters who help to keep this podcast going. You too can join our Patreon program, and by doing so, you get instant access to the transcriptions of this podcast, and also the occasional live Zoom chat with me so that you can practice some informal English with a casual chat. Go to patreon.com/inglespodcast for more information.
It would be really nice to say the name of every single supporter through Patreon, but we haven't got time. So we'll do what we always do and mention our most recent supporters who've joined this month, and they are A. Reina, Maria Lara, and Liliana Torres. Thanks to you and all our Patreon supporters.
Yes, thank you very, very much. In next week's episode, we'll be speaking about some pronunciation, in particular consonant clusters, when you get more than 2 consonants in the same word. How can you pronounce them? Join us next week for that. Until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. And we remind you that the music this week in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.